Welcome to the Riverside Project podcast. We are mobilizing Houston to empower families and transform generations. We hope these conversations will give you a greater understanding of the issues facing our community and inspire you to find your place along the river. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Riverside Project podcast. We're so glad that you're here with us today. As you can see, this is not our normal podcast setup. A couple of weeks ago, we lost our office space, and so we had to shift, and we are currently building a new podcast studio. But the great thing about that is we actually have the opportunity now to do some virtual episodes in the meantime, and we're able to hear some voices from people, experts in this space who are all over the country. And so today we have Dr. Danisha Keating with us today, and she is an author, a CEO, a business owner, and a keynote speaker. And ever since she could remember, Dr. Keating has been passionate about education and helping others achieve success. As a former foster youth, she has learned the importance of furthering her education and building a network of people around her. Since 2009, she has helped students understand the value of education and striving to define success by what that means to each individual. And so she has created this concept called From Foster to Blank. She also wrote a book called From Foster to Ph.D. And that's really to just encourage foster youth and advocates of foster youth to strive for their dreams and goals. So, Dr. Keating, we're so grateful that you're with us today and grateful to hear just a little bit more about your story.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, we always start these times off just giving us an introduction. Who are you? Where have you come from? And what brought you to us today?
So, just it's always that weird, like, hey, who are you? I'm like,
it's a big question.
It's
not an easy thing. Tell us everything.
It is, because I feel like with our stories, they're so unique and there's so much to it that it's like, okay, let me tell the parts that people can know. But
right.
For me, it's like I came from, I'm just a person. I'm here, a human being, just like everybody else, but
Absolutely.
Someone who has had life hit just a little bit harder. and I think, for me, it's like, I've written my story into a book called From Foster to PhD. I was a foster youth, but I'm still someone who advocates in that space because I realize that there's not a lot of people who do that. And there's many, many reasons why. And sometimes it's shame, sometimes it's guilt, sometimes it's fear of what other people would say to us, or having people want something from us because now, they see us successful and they're like, well, now I want from you. And that can be hard. But I advocate to show people that we are someone who can overcome hard things. A lot of people use the word like grit or, you're fearless or you're so strong. And it's like, we shouldn't have had to be. But what I hope is that we can turn our pain into purpose and our pain into something that shows other people that they can get out of where they're at too. We don't have to stay there. But I'm hopeful. I am somebody who can encourage people and be an encourager and a friend to people who might feel like they don't have anyone in their circle.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so needed in this space. What we hear often is so many youth and even the people serving those youth that everyone just really feels so alone. And so much about the idea of the river is that we are not alone. We actually have other people in this space with us to help us and to carry that load with one another. And so, yes, thank you so much for speaking that as well. So share with me a little bit about just your journey through education. Not going, you can share any of the details that you want. I know there's a lot of it in the book that's just so vulnerable. But share just a little bit for us about where you that kind of education journey from foster to PhD. Can you just share a couple of tidbits about it?
It's a lot because I was homeschooled before put into high school.
Okay.
And it was one of those things that we weren't really homeschooled. It was just like a cover for my parents. It was more of an ego trip for them, if I'm being honest. And that's not a far-fetched thing to say. They liked saying, oh, we had 11 kids. Oh, we homeschool all of them. It was like everyone praised them for it. But we weren't being educated. And so I learned how to read when I was 9. I have dyslexia, and I didn't realize that until high school. I just thought I was a slow learner, and I didn't recognize that I was writing backwards backwards or like reading slanted or all of the things that happen when it comes to, dyslexia and other issues. But when I was put into high school, it was definitely, I was met with teachers, some teachers who wanted to help me and other teachers who were just like, you're a lost cause. You come from that sort of a family. Like you don't get the special treatment that a good student would. And I really hate the whole GPA thing, but I know like too, we can overcome GPAs. It's just hard when you do strive and you fight for good education in the sense of just like, I show up every day, I try every day, I study every day. And there are people out there who are smarter than me. And I know that, but I'm going to still try for my own benefit. But when I went to college, it was a community college and it was definitely looked down upon by a lot of people. I was mocked and made fun of. I remember taking we used to have like these exit exams for high schoolers where you had to take it your junior and senior year. And if you didn't pass your junior year, you took it again. If you didn't pass your senior year, you went to continuation school. And I remember stressing over it so much. And everyone's like, it's fine. You learned this in the 8th grade. And I was like, I didn't go to the 8th grade. Like, it was so frustrating because it's like, it's like, you don't understand. They're like, you just have to try. I'm like, I am trying. So it was emotional just to get through high school. And when I entered, I was already behind. I was 20 units behind my freshman year, and all of my teachers failed me in my second semester because I was put in the second semester. So then going to college, it was like a last ditch effort because I didn't want to continue working in a warehouse. And that was kind of where people said that's your future, is you get to do jobs like this. And those jobs are not degrading or bad. It's just like, if you want more for your life, that's not where you stay, and I wanted more. I didn't want to just be like, yeah, let me work a 9 to 5 and work for very little money at that point. I think I was making like $6 an hour. And I'm like, that's so low. And I didn't like that thought of like always being in debt. So I was like, I want to do something different. And I looked into college, went to community college and struggled for a really long time. And it took 8 years to get my bachelor's done. And then I started raising my siblings while trying to finish, and went through my master's program in a year and my PhD program in 3.5 years. But along the way, it was consistently like, there were some people who supported me and some people who just mocked me and made fun of me and said, like, you're never going to make it. Like, you have these dreams, like you shouldn't go for. But then the opposite side, where they're like, people would judge me before they even got to know me or my story and just be like, oh, you're just another, white girl trying to go out and have mommy and daddy give everything to you. And I'm like, you have no idea where I've been. And it's hard because like in college, I was homeless from 19 to 24 before I got my own apartment. And I was like house hopping and living in my car for a full year. And people would just be like, yeah, that's cool. And I'm like, wow, okay. But then there were people who came along too, and they were just like, hey, come stay with us. Or like, hey, we have a room for 3 months. But it was, from 18 to 24, I had over 33 different addresses that I had registered with the state of California. And it's just like, you look back on it and you're like, you shouldn't have survived. Like, let's be real. Like, I should have gotten into more trouble than I did. More bad things should have happened because I was staying at strangers' houses. Like, I'd meet them on day 1 of college or whatever and just be like, hey, let's be friends. Like, I'd end up staying at their home that night. And it's like, that's really dangerous when you think back on it. And you're like, how did I survive? And it's because of other people coming in and saying, hey, that's not a safe thing. Let's go this way.
Yeah, that so many statistics just being blown out of the water there. We know the statistics around kids who are aging out of foster care and the percentage that go on to a college education or any college or even graduating from high school. And it is, like you said, not just a challenge. It is exceedingly difficult to persevere. One, just learning challenges and the constant moves and all the educational challenges that we know that are happening with foster youth, but also those relational challenges and that the feelings of shame that come from other people. What motivated you to just keep going? You said, I just don't want to live to just be in debt. I want to make something for myself. But did you feel like that was an internal perseverance that was just something inside of you driving you, or was it external, or maybe a combination of both? What pushed you
I think it was a little bit of both because even though I had like, hey, I don't want to be here, like I never imagined my life being what it was. I didn't know that the doors I have open today are the doors I would have had open. Like I just didn't know
Yeah.
that. But there was a big factor of my siblings where at, 16, 17, I was like, I need to get my life together. So that way, if they need me, I'm able to take them in. And, of course, you're just kind of making that decision up front, but that was always my worry. And I remember people telling me in high school, like, that's not your concern, that's your parents' concern. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, this is my concern. While most kids are going out and having fun on Friday nights and like hanging out with people or going to dances, my first concern was my siblings. And that was something like when foster care happened, I blamed myself a lot. And that was something that my parents both had said, like, this is your fault because you didn't step up more. And so
Were you the
when I turned
oldest?
19, I was the fourth oldest.
The
But
oldest. Okay.
still, it was like, there was still that, like, hey, you're the one in the house now. So you have to
Yeah.
do these things. But then after college or after high school, it was still like it was my responsibility. Like I had to stay local. I had to go to a local community college because if I left, they wouldn't get the care that they needed. And so there was always this like, hey, get your life together before things happen and blow up because it will. It always does in my family. So got to get this
Mhm.
done. And sure enough, at 24, it did. It blew up again. And foster care was another thing hanging over us again for a second time. And luckily, the state of California was like, yeah, you could take them at 24. And like, you can stay, with them in a 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom apartment and figure it out. And that was hard. And one of the hard parts is that people don't realize underneath guardianship, when you don't go through the foster care system, and it's not labeled the correct way, you actually go through a guardianship or a kinship route. And kinship and guardianship are still vastly different in my state. Guardianship doesn't have as much funding or help or guidance as like kinship and foster care do. And so there was a whole mess with like not getting the financial support that I could have or should have gotten. And that was another challenge where it was just like looking back, it's like if I didn't have community coming in and being like, you have to change your game, you have to do better things, you have to make good choices, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. And one of my friends who's a pastor sat me down when I was like 22 and then again at 24 when I took my siblings in. And he's just like, I know you know this, but you're not the typical 22, 24-year-old kid. Like you can't just wait for life to fall into your pocket. You have to go out and get it. And it was just like that adult conversation where it was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, like I don't get to be like my friends. I gotta get going. But that also came like with the loss of friends because a lot of people my age were like, this is too much. Like
Mhm.
we're all trying to live and go out and have fun, and you're all over here being serious. So there was like two hits where it was just like external and internal motivators, but it was not something that some people have those same things standing in front of them and they go, yeah, I'm done.
Yeah.
Which it makes sense because it's really hard. It's hard decision after hard decision.
Yeah. So, how many of your siblings did you have with you during that time?
Five. So they were 12, 14, 15, 18, and 19.
Okay.
And we were in for 9 months in a 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, 500 square foot apartment. So not very big.
Yeah. While you're going to
But it
school
was hard.
slash working.
While I'm doing my bachelor's, while I'm working, I ended up moving from like a part-time job to a full-time job. And like overnight, literally overnight, it was like, hey, you're a parent now.
Yeah.
And that I remember so many moments. I was thinking about this yesterday that just like kind of sitting back and being like, oh, I'm in it. Like, this is it.
Yeah.
I can't fail. I can't screw up. I can't make any mistakes because if I do, it doesn't impact just me. It's going to impact them. So it made me, I feel like when I took them in, it made me kind of like get really serious. And that's why I ended up finishing my master's in a year and my PhD in 3.5, because I was like, I have to go. But it also went on the bad end of it, even though they all grew up and I finished my PhD when the last one, the youngest one, who was 12 at the time, he was 18 in 2021. He graduated the same year that I finished. But it was one of those things that I didn't even stop to really like celebrate
Yeah.
because I was just in my head. I'm like, still go, still go, still go. And it's taken about 3 years for me to finally be like, whoa, I don't need to do everything. I don't need to save the world. I don't have to jump into that. I can slow down now. But it was like that weird, I recognized I was in a consistent fight or flight. Where it was like, I'm always going to go into the fight ready, but it's like, oh, this is not good because you don't celebrate your wins along the way.
Yeah, you're in that survival space, like you said. You're just going, and that adrenaline's going, and it's like, if I stop, I don't know that I can get started again. So I just kind of have to keep at this
Well,
pace.
and you're not, yeah, absolutely. And you're not sure. It's more like some people are like, well, it's like, are you afraid? Someone asked me that. They go, are you afraid of like not starting up again? And I'm like, well, no, it's if like I recognize this year because this year has felt more slow than like last year because I was in survival mode last year. But because I had my daughter early, but it was one of those things that it's like, I felt like I was like in go, go, go mode. And they said, if you were to sit still, what are you afraid of? And I was like, my world falling apart. Like, that's what I'm afraid of. And that's what I've been afraid of. And I recognize, like, that's not this year. This is my whole life. Like, if I stood still, things wouldn't get done. And now I'm like, I'm not in that environment or in those environments anymore. Like, I can sit still and things are not going to fall apart. I know this. But it takes the mind and the heart to align to finally be like, you can sit still and it will be okay. But I think so many foster youth, like we get into that mode of like, it's fight or flight, man. It's go for survival mode. And if we don't go, things are going to fall apart or we're not going to get where we need to go. Or something bad's going to happen if we're stationary, so it is overwhelming to where it does make you want to quit a lot more. Because that uphill battle is so hard that it's like if I hit a little road bump, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to take decades to get out of. And then I'm like, no, it's not. Like, I got all my tools. I know my resources. I know what to do. But at 20, I remember that feeling of just like, it always felt like I was going uphill and people were just like, you're not going to make it, and knocking me back down. And I'm like, oh, my little mountains today are not my mountains that were at 20 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that idea of shame kind of always over here. Always, there's a sense of responsibility to keep going, and the things that you have in front of you that you have to do. And then there's always kind of that aching kind of that voice of shame that it's motivating, but not necessarily in the most healthy way. How did you kind of overcome that aspect of life?
I'm still working on that.
As many of us
that might be like a lifelong thing. Because 28 years of survival like that before I met my husband, and him being such a blessing, because it's like, he's like, hey, I'm here to help now. And my community who helps in that. But it's like 28 years of fighting. It's going to take 28 years to undo, maybe even twice as long. But I just keep reminding myself, like, look, you've won. You have ran across finish lines. You watched other people. You don't have to do this alone. And that, I think, when really that helps is like, hey, there's a whole community of people out there who want to stand by me. And then if I'm not in those communities, I need to get in those communities, because it's hard to find people who are trustworthy and honest and authentic. But it's like, okay, I need to recognize first that like I will always be working on this and always be honest with myself. Like if I'm starting to feel off and feel like I am in fight or flight again, I'm like, okay, what's going on? Let's analyze what's happening. Let's sit back and kind of think through what's going on. And why do I feel like, and usually if I feel panic, or I feel like I want, and it's going to sound so silly, but if I feel like I consistently want to slap people, there's something going on internally that's telling me I'm off. And I know that sounds funny, but it's not like I want to get violent, but it's more of that like defense mechanism. It's not like, hey, I like this. It's more of like, why do I feel like I'm afraid for my life right now that I have to physically like pick up an arm to help myself get out? And that's where I have to sit back and like start looking and asking the questions. And this is like, I personally think it's going to be lifelong, because it's not something that the brain retains so much. And it's like that little fear behind it might be like, hey, we know this route. And I know that the brain gets imprinted with information that it's like, we've been down a path before it our brain tells us like, hey, you're in danger. And we've been through this already. So if this is what it was last time, it's going to be like this again. And so I'm having to retrain my brain and say, hey, but the second time we went through this, it wasn't like that. The third time we went through this, it still wasn't like that. So it's that retraining of the brain. And I've noticed there are moments where it's not like, I'll be sitting back, I'm like, oh, I didn't panic like I used to. And I'm like, great, now let's keep going. But it is a lifelong thing that I'm going to have to work through, I feel like, because it took a long time to get hurt and to be hurt in the ways that I was, and to a long time to get out of survival mode, that I think I have to get used to good, not bad. Yeah. And I got used to the bad.
And it speaks to that idea that trauma that happens in relationship has to be healed in relationship, that we begin to heal from shame when we retrain and rewire those pathways that say it doesn't always have to be, I do this and then I get a response that increases my shame, that you can connect with another person. Yeah. So for like caregivers and caseworkers and the people who are interacting with kids that are in hard situations, we do have that ability to look them in the eye and help them kind of have a new pathway to, like you said, a pathway in their brain that tells them a different story. Is so, so important. Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about your book.
A little bit about the relationships, healing relationships. I think sometimes we hear that and we mishear it, where it's like it has to be in the same relationships. Right. It might not be. You might never get that healing from that old relationship, but it's new people that can re-show you like what is community, what is love, what is help, what is good. And that's where I know for myself, like I could never get that healing from the people who hurt me, but I have found the healing through people who have shown me what real family is, what real love is, what real community looks like. And that's incredible, because that's something like I never realized until I was like, oh, this is what that saying means. Because I kept trying to chase the old. And you're never gonna find healing in the people that hurt you. And if they're not willing to change, it's not worth it. But you can find healing through other people and be like, okay, this is what it should look like.
Did it take a while with those new people who were showing you those things? They were showing you what the good is. They were showing you those things. But did it take a while for you to build the type of trust and them staying when your responses may not have been congruent with that?
Yeah. And some people are just like, hey, we're done. We're not trying with you anymore, which I understand why. But I think for me, if anyone ever comes too quick and they're like, I have the answers for you, I'm going to be your best friend, I'm going to heal you, or like, you can trust me. Those are things that I immediately go, you're not something, you're too quick. You're trying too hard with me. It's the people who have always been really slow to the relationships, to building the deeper relationships, not the wide, but the deep relationships, to be like, they're not trying to trauma bond, or they're not trying to trauma up and be like, yeah, I went through something similar. They're just like, you know what? I see you. I want to know you. I want to love you in the way that you're comfortable with. And then as time went on, people revealed, like, I also went through stuff like this, or a friend of mine, or my spouse's friend, or my spouse went through this. And so I was able to learn like who my safe people were, because reality is a lot of us want to care for kids in foster youth. And we want to be like, we're your best friends in like a week. And it's like, that is where we go, Normally people who have done that to us, it's been bad. Caseworkers try to do that a lot, where they're just like, hey, I know you, I know what's good for you. Just listen to me, do what I say, and you won't get in trouble. And it's like, I did what you said and I still got in trouble. I did what you said and I still got moved. So then someone who's authentic wants to come in, and it's like, just slow down, let them have time, let them build that relationship with you and that trust with you. And sometimes it's the silence where it's like, I just want to sit with you and I don't want you to give me anything. I just want you to sit with me. So that it's super different when we're starting to look at it like a real relationship, but it's like, we're going to come in more scared.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Super helpful. So tell me a little bit about why you wanted to write the book, From Foster to Ph.D. Letters from a Suitcase. I've been reading it, and I have cried a little bit. I have smiled a little bit in those moments where it's written kind of from your perspective at the age where you were walking through all of these things, and knowing, with my own kids and being connected to different kids in this space, I I see those glimpses of their stories too in your words, and the heartache that's there and the healing that's there. Just a lot of emotion, but I'm really, really grateful for it. I can imagine it being a very vulnerable thing to do. So, what made you want to do it?
Oh, it was terrifying. It was scary. Really, I started, after I did my research, I started looking at just stories of foster youth. And I realized there were not a lot of foster youth stories out there. There was maybe one or two that I saw in the education realm, but most of the ones that are out there are all sharing in depth, in detail, their story of abuse, which is fine. But for someone like me, it was very hard to read those and to even get past page 5. Like, I would always be like, I can't do this. This is too much. I was too close to my trauma, and that, like, I was too close to what hurt me. And I don't know if I could, like, people give me books a lot and they're just like, yeah, my whole story's in there. And I'm like, wow, trigger warning. Like, this might not be a good idea. So I wanted to highlight specifically within the education side, because that's not highlighted a lot, to where it's like, hey, here are the struggles that we go through as a foster youth, but also too, like, you're telling me to go with, but I'm not set up with my educational foundation missing. I have dyslexia. That was never addressed and helped. And it's very odd to just be like, go find success and good luck. And you're like, I can't even spell at this point. Like, I can't pronounce big words. I can't sound smart to people. I don't have an intensive vocabulary. Like, it doesn't happen, but I started looking and I was like, what I want is for people to see the educational struggle more than know my abuse story. I want them to see the win, not just the, okay, well, I'm fine now if you look me up on social media, like, but I still struggle even with the age that I am with imposter syndrome. I still struggle with those emotional issues. And I really was hoping, and I am hoping, that the book can highlight those educational struggles, but also highlight, like, the trauma influence is lifelong, and we have to consistently deal with it. Just because we deal with it once doesn't mean we won't have to deal with it again on a deeper level. And when I started putting this stuff in there, I started taking out details of the abuse. But it was healing to me, because there was something that I saw from what I wrote my senior year in high school for a senior project. And I was like, didn't realize, because like I had someone write something and then I wrote something, but I mixed them up thinking one was me and one was her. And then I looked at it and I was like, oh, that was me. That's my story. And I was like, wow, I've come a long way in healing. But how many other kids are in this trying to navigate college, and people are just like, you're not showing up, you're not trying, and they're giving it their all. We don't know what happens behind people's closed doors in the hardness of their emotions. And so my hope was to show that more than the abuse details, because I mean, people have asked, they've read the book and they're like, well, why didn't you go into more detail? And I said, because this one wasn't necessary to have it.
That's not what it's about.
This one needed to be more about what real struggles we face in education, but also too, like, the self-doubt that we have in addition to the educational struggles. Like, there's the educational struggles, and there's the relationship struggles, then there's the physical, financial struggles that we go through. And then there's the self-doubt that goes into that too, that everybody faces. But you pile that onto one person, and it's just like, how do we recover? So my hope is to provide the hope in that, to be like, hey, you get to see the end of the story as well, but you get to be brought through the journey of what those emotions feel like in real time, of reading things from my own diary.
Yeah. And you mentioned the educational challenges that you, of course, mentioned in your book. And now, of course, you're working in a space where you're getting to address that from the PhD level. Can you describe a little bit about what those, you've mentioned what those educational challenges for foster youth are, and how they come to be? And then just what's most helpful for overcoming that? What does it take to help them through that process and to overcome those challenges?
So it's every grade level is different, but K through 12, a big issue is only 50% of foster youth are actually graduating. But by the 8th grade, 75% have decided if they're going to go to college or not. That's what they have found when they spoke to foster youth who have left high school. One of the biggest issues within K through 12 is that teachers don't even know if their student is in foster care or not. And everyone's always like, well, FERPA, that's a violation. And it's like, if your kid is in your classroom, and they're going through something at home, and all of a sudden a stranger is picking them up from the school, we need to know to be able to intervene to help. First off, for safety purposes. But secondly, these kids are being moved. I've talked to some foster youth that said that they moved 8 high schools. So they don't get the whole foundation of education. So like mine, I was homeschooled, but we weren't being taught. And then I'm thrown into high school and said, figure it out. And I went from no classes to from teaching myself on Google and through a dictionary to 6 periods of classes and 5 of my teachers not caring about that. And I explained like, hey, I've never been in school before. This is my first time. I need a few weeks. But by week 2, they're like, nope, you got to get this. We're in the middle of a semester. And one teacher told me, I don't care.
Yeah.
That's your problem, not mine. And I was like, whoa. Yeah. So there is some, like, not all teachers are like that, but right. A lot of teachers are. When a student gets moved 8 different times in a span of 4 years, there's no educational foundation. And then they're thrown to your only option. And this is a huge thing within foster care, is that we are telling foster youth that the only route for you is college, and that's it. But there are trade schools. There's things like cosmetology, being a welder. Some kids are better with building things than they are with textbook things. And that is not a bad thing, but we look down on and we speak down to that type of education. We tell students that the only route you can go is for safety, to get a good job, to get things that you want to pay for, is to go get a full-time job after going to school, but then you don't set them up for success on getting the money they need to go to college. So then we have all these kids going into college at that point, and only 3% are graduating. There are a lot more support programs here in California for community colleges now. But when I went, there was 0. But a lot of other states in the US don't even have anything. So it's like, it depends now by state of where you go.
Yeah.
When they did a research, and I don't remember who it was, but I have it somewhere, so I can always send it to you. But if you look it up on Google, you can see what the percentage is for kids wanting to go to college from high school. It's 78% want to go. It's like 78 to 80% wanted to go to college. Only 45% of them finished FAFSA, and only 3% are graduating from a bachelor's or an associate's across the US. The reason is because there's a lack of financial support from family, a lack of emotional support from family. They turn 18 or they get extended to 21 if they know that they can do that. But at that point, they're expected just to be out on their own, because most of them lose the foster home that they have. And that's like, I was immediately homeless at 18 and still in high school. Yeah. And I was like, what am I supposed to do about this? And they're just like, you figure it out. You're an adult now. And it's like someone had said, you just throw them to the wolves and you hope they survive. And it's like, yeah, we have a lot of support and programs and things like that, but there's so many things that are capping students or these young adults from going to the next level. And one of the big issues, and this is kind of where foster parents come into play, is that a lot of foster parents are not getting the birth certificates, the social security cards. So they're not able to pass them to this young adult to say, okay, go do what you got to do. There's no financial aid training. There's no one walking through college applications. There's no one even walking through a job application to get, or even how to get their state ID. So you have there's a bigger issue where it's like you have your educational foundation missing, but then there's another big issue in the room where it's like they're not even getting the proper paperwork to be able to do the bigger things that they need to do, like get a job and or get their driver's license. And so it's like, oh, you turned 18. Most foster parents go, you're not my problem anymore.
Yep.
So unfortunately, in order to change that, and it's really sad to me. It breaks my heart, because I was at a conference and we did like a panel that I got to be on. And we had 2 people on the panel. One was from the 90s. I was in the foster care system in 2005. And again in 2015 with my siblings. Both of our stories mirrored each other, even though in my time there's been more help. But then someone else from 2023 was like, I was in the foster care system last year and I had the same exact experience. And then I posted on Facebook or on Instagram, because I was like, this is really hurting. Like I'm really hurt by this, because it's like, how is it going to be that long that we do nothing? Yeah. And someone from the 60s was like, hey, I was in the foster care system in the 60s and it was the same thing that it is today. And that's something that I saw from my research too. And that just is like, we think that we're doing all this stuff. And when we really look at it, what tends to happen is we keep building a lot of the same things, a lot of the same organizations, a lot of the same programs, but nobody wants to work together. Now, I wouldn't say nobody. A lot of places are like, we're in competition. We are not friends. I hear that as a keynote speaker. I've had places say, no, we don't want to talk to you and have you come in to talk to our youth because you're not a part of our community. And I'm like, I get it that you're trying to protect people, but what if I am somebody who can encourage someone that you can't reach? But we silo our organizations and we say, no, we can't partner together. And it's really hard to find information. That's the other big issue. And that's something that a lot of schools are trying to change, but the information is still really hard. The colleges I spoke to said it takes 2 to 3 years for students to finally find out about their programs because we have to wait for them to self-identify as a foster youth. But then when you talk to high school and junior high schools, they say, well, we don't even know who's in the foster youth system here anyway, because we have to wait for someone to tell us. And I'm like, that's not great.
How's that helping?
I know it's just this whole issue of lack of information everywhere. So it's like, how do we fix an issue like this? And it's really, we have to show, one, that we care for the foster youth, and two, that it's not their fault. Because the reason that I didn't speak up for so long was because I blamed myself. And I listened to my caseworker who said it was my fault, my parents who said it was my fault, my high school counselor who said it was my fault. And it was like, no, it was never my fault. Yeah. But I often was told that I'm like, why would I say that this is my life if people are going to just be like, well, you should have done better?
Yeah. You spoke to something we've talked about on this podcast before. We've had some educators that have been on and some trauma-informed people. And we've talked a lot about how programs are necessary, right? Services for foster youth, yes, and they are necessary. But outside of relationships to help them access them and help them utilize them, if those are missing, the programs aren't effective. It's kind of what you said.
Absolutely.
Like, even if we can get the applications to them, the application itself, I fill out some of these, applications for different things, and I'm handing it to my husband because I'm like, I don't know how to do this. Or I'm trying to find someone who has walked this road and can actually come alongside me to help me do it. We're always looking for peers who are like, oh, you filled this out before. Can you help me through it? Can you help me know what to expect? Yeah. The relationships are key. And I do think that in our systems, regardless of what state you're in, I think we continually look at these problems as start another program, start another service. If we just get another program and we're missing it, right? We're missing it.
Or the other thing I hear often is, well, if we just had a room, and I always ask, and I'm like, okay, I understand, but let me ask this question. You have a room right now, right? Yeah, but if it was better, it's like, if it's not happening now, it's not happening when you improve it. I don't care if you have nice couches, but if you come at me and say, like, you could be successful if you were in our program, it's like, I'm found success without a program. Mm-hmm. But what I needed were the relationships of the people who went through it before me and said, hey, this is how you navigate this thing. And they don't all have to be foster youth. I found out about a Ph.D. route instead of an Ed.D. route for where I wanted to particularly go, from a dean and a professor that I had. I said, I want every door open to me. And he goes, go the Ph.D. route. And I said, okay. And that was something that a dean who was not foster youth told me about. But it was the information and the relationship that made the bigger impact for me than a room with a nice couch. And yeah, we need the programs, but a lot of these programs are also very limited in who they can help. And it's like, if I'm 18, you're saying I can't be helped unless I'm enrolled in school. But then when I'm enrolled in school, I can only tap into it until I'm 21. Or with my case, we recently found out that I was entered in, like, when we were younger, we were entered into the foster care system, but they flipped our file to voluntary foster placement, which meant that we went back with family. But they label it as parents, even though we were put with my older sister, and then my siblings were put with me when I was 24. They label it as it was voluntary. They worked together with the foster care system. They went back with the parents, and then now they don't get any of the resources because they were never labeled foster youth permanency. And I'm like, but they were foster youth. We were foster youth. We went through these systems, and that was why we never got the financial assistance that I needed to take care of my siblings too. So it's like, stop limiting these things so much. that it really is hurting people from getting the access to this stuff, and then focus on the relationship, not the dollar amount.
Yeah. Yeah. The
But I think
relationships.
that's hard for people to hear.
It is. And it sometimes will come across as, that, that the programs or the services aren't needed. I think there's a whole lot of people in our community who are doing really, really great, running really, really great programs. And so I never want
Yeah.
to come across as saying that those aren't helpful or those aren't needed. They are very, very, very vital.
Yeah.
It's just devoid of relationship alongside those.
Mm.
And the other thing that it brings up is, this idea of the river that we talk about all the time. A lot of people we come across will say, well, I'm not a foster parent, or I'm not a caseworker, or I'm not an official person in this space. And this is why we say any safe person has a place along the river, because you have the opportunity to provide a relationship. If you can provide a relationship through a mentorship, or through it being a friend, through being a tutor, through being a coach, through being a teacher, you have everything you need to help someone be successful. I think that's what you're highlighting.
Absolutely. One of the things too is, like, a lot of the times people that are making the decisions up here, they're not talking to the people down here that are in the trenches or the foster youth themselves. And so it's like, it sounds like a great idea, but it's missing that relational piece. And it's like, you could have the best program ever with all the money ever, but if you don't have the relationships to build and hear and listen, you're not going to make the decision that's going to actually impact someone long term. And there is still a huge stigma with foster youth that we are just trying to get all this free money, or like we're trying to manipulate the system or something like that. And it's like, if you ever talk to a foster youth, they're like, I don't want the money because it needs to go to someone who needs it more. So it's like, if we stop with that mental thinking and like bring those voices in with us, we're going to make decisions that are more impactful, that are based on relationships versus just based on like, this sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned earlier is the kind of the power of healthy transitions. We talk a lot about, kids transition a lot in the foster care system. And what we think of is kids transition from placement to placement to placement, or family to different type of home. But what we don't realize is within that major transition, there's all kinds of smaller transitions. And so education is a big one. If we don't realize that kids, when they transition to a new home, that means a new school. Lots of behaviors come up in the middle of transitions, where we know that most kids they really struggle behaviorally in the midst of those transitions, because they're scary. They're really scary times.
Yeah.
So I love that you mentioned that as well. It's not just moving from home to home, but it's moving from school to school as well, or neighborhood to neighborhood.
And sometimes it's moving from even just from like a counselor to a high school counselor to another high school counselor. Because mine wasn't helping me, and I went to another one who started to help me, but then she told me she couldn't help me anymore because she was going to get in trouble for helping me. And it was like, that created behavioral issues, because then I felt like there was no one on my team who was actively guiding me for education. And so I started acting up, and it was like, it was just hard, because it was just like, well, I'm a product of my environment. My emotions are happening for a reason. I'm not just doing this to be a jerk. And luckily, one of my teachers noticed and was just like, hey, Dee, let's go talk for a second. You're not like this. What's going on? And I just told them everything. And they were like, we had no idea you were going through any of this. And I'm like, okay, but my counselor told me he talked to all my teachers, and my caseworker said he talked to all my teachers, and he threatened that he was going to kick me out of school. And if I failed a quiz, the teachers had him on speed dial. So it's like, now I feel like I can't even cry in class. I can't even fail a quiz. I can't even do anything all the other students are doing, because if I do, I'm out. So, and that's the reality, is that sometimes people don't talk, and this is the hard part I found out recently, like this year. In 2006, when I was dealing with my caseworker, he was threatening me all of the time. He's like, if you say a bad word, your teachers have me on speed dial. You fail a quiz, they have me on speed dial. You don't show up to class right on time, I'm on speed dial. You take too many bathroom breaks, I'm on speed dial. You will go to the continuation school. I will move you to this other city and or state if I have to. Don't F up. And I'm like sitting here like, what the heck? And so then I turn 18, and he comes into my school and goes, you have to pack up and leave your house today, because you can't stay in the same room as your younger sister who's under the age of 18. So I pack up in a hurry and leave and go to a friend's house. And I'm with my sister at that point, and she goes, wait, what? Like this year, she's like, wait, what? I was like, yeah, the caseworker told me I had to get out. She's like, dude, I thought you ran away. Like, I thought you were just being a jerk and being like this and that. I was like, no, he was consistently threatening me. And one of my brothers was like, no, yeah, he always came down on her and was like this and this and this and that. And like, I was there when he told her that. How did you not know? And it's like, that was our guardian who was never brought into the conversation. There are people out there still doing that to foster youth, and it might not be their caseworker. It might be a teacher. It might be even just a friend who they're with who's like, oh yeah, this one foster care kid I knew. And so it's like, we have to be willing to be all in with these conversations. And when we notice the behavior, we go, hey, what's going on? Like, I know that this is a hard time. What can I do to help? This has to be hard on you, even if they're not acting out. It's just like, hey, I'm here if you do want to process this. I know that this could be hard. I can only imagine that there are a lot of emotions, and I'm not going to pretend to understand how you feel, but I'm here if you want to talk through anything, because that just opens up a safer conversation versus like, hey, you're screwing up. Hey, you're being like this. It's like, I felt at that point I was fighting for education. And I really was, because I had just not the greatest team on my side. But then like my older sister's just like, how did I not know that this was happening? And I was like, I know I told you. But if that parent is really stressed out, they're not going to hear what we're saying. But it was just like interesting that she's like, I never knew he said that to you. And I was like, well, he told me he talked to you guys.
Of course.
So I assumed you're all on the same page because you guys are doing what's best for me. Oh, yeah. Oh, and on purpose. It was definitely, he was not a good caseworker. And I ran into someone who knows him, who worked in the system at that point, and this person confirms, like, yeah, that was who he was as a person. So I'm so sorry that happened to you. And I'm like, oh, that took 20 years. So that's hard.
That kind of brings us into our last question just before we close out. If you were sitting at coffee with a youth who's kind of in that space now, a foster youth who's considering, what do I want to do with my life? Should I pursue education? What wisdom would you have for someone who might be struggling in that space?
I would ask questions first. Because really what tends to happen is us foster youth are told, like, you have to go where the money is. And a lot of us are told like two things. You have to give back to the community. You can become a counselor because of your trauma, or you should go into the medical field and become a nurse or a doctor. So that way you can make a lot of money. And usually when I talk to foster youth, those are the two areas that they talk about. And I ask them, I'm like, what are you passionate about? What do you like to do? And a lot of them will be like, well, I want to go be an actor. I want to be a writer. I want to be, I don't want to do that. I want to own my own business. I want to do hair. And it's like, have you talked to the community college just to see what trade, like certificates you can do right now, and then see if that's an option for you? The other thing I always tell people is just like, have you talked to anybody in that field yet? No, you need to do that. Because you could go into school and you're going to change 20 different times. You're going to fail a quiz, you're going to fail a class, and you're going to be like, wow, I'm not meant to be here. But if you talk to someone in the field, you'll find if you really want to go that route. And then no, it's okay. Like, if you don't know what you want to do, take a couple classes and different things that you think that's interesting, see if you like it. But it's okay to also not go that route. It's okay to go work for a year or two and see if you like it. But if you don't want to get a degree, if you don't want to go to college and you want to do something like hair or be a truck driver or a welder, go just do a certificate, get it done, and then go and try. And then if you don't like it, you can always go back to school later. Like, it's not a rush. And that's the wisdom I give. It's not a rush. But also too, if you know what you want to do, go for it. Don't let people tell you not to. People will always have an opinion, but they don't pay the bills.
Yeah.
That's a reality.
That's good. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We're really, really grateful for your voice. I know, I just want you to know that your voice matters so much in this space, and we're really, really grateful for it. I'm grateful for the book. We will post a link to it. It is right here. It's lovely. And again, your words in it are just really, really powerful. And so thank you for writing it, having the courage to do that. And thank you for the work that you do truly every day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
To those listening, we hope these conversations have inspired you to find your place along the river. And we welcome you to join us in bringing hope and renewal to the city of Houston. If you'd like more information on how to get involved, please visit riversideproject.org and submit a contact form. We'll see you next time.